Hey everybody, welcome to the What is Money Show. I am thrilled to have you here joining me on my mission to help shine light on the corruption of money. Now, a little bit about this show and how it makes money. We are 100% sponsor based, which means that all the revenues we derive come from sponsorships. But I try to be very selective about the sponsors that I work with, specifically trying to choose those who have values well aligned to the values expressed on this show, like freedom, education, self-sovereignty, etc. So what I'm going to do is a few ad reads right here at the top of the show and then a few ad reads in the middle. And I hope you won't skip them. I hope you'll take the time, listen, and see what they have to offer, because again, these are hand-selected sponsors. Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, Pacific Bitcoin Conference, brought to you by Swan. Now, this is going to be a 2-day event in Los Angeles, November 10th and 11th, 2022. And if you haven't been to a Bitcoin conference yet, I highly recommend it, as there really is no better way to get integrated into the Bitcoin community. Speakers announced so far include Michael Saylor, Lynn Alden, many others. I'll be speaking as well. Michael Saylor is even quoted as saying, "This is going to be the event of the year, so you definitely don't want to miss it." So go to pacificbitcoin.com and use discount code BREEDLOVE to get your tickets today. Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, Ledn. Ledn lets you do more with your digital assets. For instance, Ledn offers a B2X loan product that lets you leverage your existing Bitcoin to buy even more Bitcoin. Or you can also get traditional Bitcoin collateralized US dollar loans through Ledn as well. Ledn also offers both Bitcoin and USDC denominated savings accounts, letting you generate yield on your digital assets. Recently, Ledn has launched a Bitcoin mortgage product as well that lets you use Bitcoin to buy a home or finance one that you already own. So go to ledn.io, that's LEDN.io today to sign up. Louis Liu, welcome to the What is Money Show.
Happy to be here. Thank you, Robert, for having me.
It's great to have you. This series has been a long time in the making. I guess first I have to thank you for introducing me to this book that we're going to be discussing, which is Things Hidden Since the Foundation of the World by René Girard. This is one of those books that really shatters your worldview in a lot of ways. And I think it's had a similar impact on you. So I'm really excited to explore this with you. Just by way of quick introduction, you are the founder and CEO of Mimesis Capital, and that is a term which we're going to be unpacking a lot here. You're also a longtime Bitcoiner, and maybe we could just start there. And we'll get more deep into this, but what does the word mimesis mean? And what caused you to name your firm after that?
Yeah, so mimesis really is meaning imitation, right? And this is like an old word, started from Aristotle, Plato, and later on in the modern world, popularized by René Girard in his book that we are going to discuss about, Things Hidden Since the Foundation of the World. He specifically talk about mimesis or mimetic desire, which is, human have a tendency to imitate each other or want what other people want. So that's the definition of mimesis. Yeah.
Yeah, and how were you introduced to this book? Because I know this, I think it came to you at a relatively young age, and then obviously had a big impact on you. So maybe you could just tell us how you discovered this book and what impact it has had.
Yeah. So I first time I read this book is forwarded by a good friend of mine. He's like entrepreneur, Taiwanese entrepreneur, and his family is one of the biggest donor in Christian community in Taiwan. He introduced me because he wanted me to read about Girard, and this is how I get introduced. And when I read it, I think like everyone first time read this, it gives you a shock, like how the word works, and you kind of like looking at the glance of Girard, and you start to see the world differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, indeed. So the word mimesis, I can't recall. I think it's an ancient Greek word. Could be wrong about that, but it's the root word. It's where we get words like mimic,
Yep.
imitate, mime. So it's all about this mirroring of action or behavior. And that
Yep.
sort of simple, relatively simple observation almost that I think Girard is asserting in this book that essentially all human interaction is mirroring, right? We're mirroring one another all the time, even unconsciously, perhaps largely unconsciously. And then he extrapolates from that behavioral pattern the development of ritual, religion, social institution, mimetic crisis, the victimage mechanism, scapegoating, all of these very interesting phenomena that seem to dictate human history and characterize human history in a lot of ways. And I think goes a long way to explaining some of the craziness we're seeing in the world today as well. Um, you're also a longtime Bitcoiner like myself. I think we'll have some interesting things to say about Bitcoin as we go along here. Um, and as this relates to money, as we were just saying offline, one of the most interesting things about this process where people mimic one another, as Girard
Mm-hmm.
describes it in the book, is when you see two apes reach for the same object, right? Reaching for the same banana, that it sort of causes conflict. There's this the mirroring of one another can cause conflict in a world of scarcity, of scarce resources. And I think as that maps onto human beings, money, as we're saying offline, is clearly the most desired asset in the world, almost by definition, in that it's convertible into any other asset. And in that way, it essentially represents power, right? And people are always seeking more power.
Mm-hmm.
And this mimetic exchange people are engaged in all the time seems to contribute to power struggles
Mm-hmm.
uh, in many domains. So I guess the other interesting thing to say about this book is that it is Peter Thiel's favorite book. And I believe, the author, René Girard, he's a French philosopher, historian, anthropologist. I think you were saying offline that maybe Peter Thiel actually went to class and went to a class Girard taught. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, I think Theo was there in Stanford when Girard also giving a lecture there.
Mm,
Yeah.
very interesting.
And there's a video of him, Peter Thiel, talking about Girard on YouTube. You can go find it.
Mm.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Yeah.
We'll have to check that out. Maybe we'll cut that in too here. So, okay. In economics, we're always talking about exchange, right? Exchange is sort of it's the activity that we engage in to overcome scarcity. But this seems to go like a layer deeper. Like typically when we talk about exchange in economics, we're talking about the actual trading of goods and services. But this is kind of a layer deeper where we're saying, no, all human interaction, like what we're doing right now, there's mirroring occurring between us.
Yeah.
Um, so it's almost like all human action is of some form of mimetic exchange, which is really interesting to think about. And then this book ultimately goes into where it gets very fascinating is Girard's interpretation of Jesus, right? And the story of Jesus Christ and being a key to transcending the logos of violence, perhaps. Is there maybe a couple of things you could say about that, like how Girard's relationship with Christ in this text?
Yeah, I think the first thing, let's start with Girard's original thesis about humanity and how world works. Um, one day he observed, there's a desire going on, in the human nature, like why people try to create this mimetic desire in the way that, he he find out this is like how the world works. Like, we all love something. It's not because we are truly love something. It's because what other desire. That's how we end up loving something or wanting something. And you think about that, and he get into deeper thoughts. Like, if this is how world works, will that end up like a huge conflict, a war that end all humanity? And why that hasn't happened yet, right? When you read about the gospel, the Bible, you read about apocalyptic situation when the world end, Jesus arrived, there's four horsemen, right? And Gerald think about that and think about how the world end up today, like how society function. If the case of mad desires lead to the ultimate conflict, and how does that happen? Like that kind of ponder Girard, and he go a step ahead further. So he started to study prehistory, right? Anthropologies, especially the myth, that he wanted to try to dig up the truth behind how the society function, how humanity solved this mimetic desire, problem of the mimetic desire. And what he found out in the myth is that there's a pattern, right? The pattern is society will reach agreeable term when they try to victimize someone and sacrifice it, and he called it scapegoat mechanism. And scapegoat mechanism is like very I think this is kind of word that people use a lot today. Like, you scapegoating someone, basically you let other to take a blame of the whole problem, right? And that's how society can keep on functioning and keep on resolving conflict for all times. And the times just like Asian, very very Asian time, and you can see people perform ritual, sacrificing babies, whatever they can do, they try to perform the ritual to let the victim become like a sort of like a god and hero in solving the conflict in the society. And you have this kind of escalating situation throughout the history of time, right? And it's quite bizarre. Like, it always ends up like scapegoating, a ritual event, sacrificing someone for the benefit of the whole humanity. And when Gerald dig into that, and he started to read a little bit on the gospel, right? He started digging very deeply into the gospel. And what he found out in his worldview, it's kind of like shocking to him, is that the answers already in the gospel, right? The answer to the scapegoating mechanism, how you go back to Cain and Abel, right? How that Cain society functioning at the end, and God punish him, get wiped out all his descendants, because his civilization found out murder of his brother Abel, right? Just because of envy of his brothers get more loved by the God. And when Gerard read that, he read the gospel. There's a myth in it. There's a sacrificial element in it. There's a scapegoating element in it. And when he read to the Jesus story, he figured out it just right in front of his eyes, when you read the gospel, that Jesus is not a sacrificial scapegoat, but rather like a savior. Like, he's like the hero, or the son of God in the gospel way, to say that he actually break the cycle of scapegoating mechanism and reveal how the world works before him and how the world should be work after him. And the civilization that we see today is built on that notion, right? That Jesus' teaching, right? The love that Jesus gave to everyone, and the decision that he tried to go on to the cross. And people read it like this is a sacrificial text, right? But Girard thinks this is not a sacrificial text. this is something revealing a lot of truth behind it. And one of the truth is to reveal this common active desire hidden in the myth, hidden in the humanity, hidden in the foundation of the world. And Jesus is kind of like the first prophet or first person that come out to it and say, this is the truth, and let's face it, right? And that's how Girard ended up like believing in the Christianity, and he thinks Christianity and Jesus is the savior of the world, and that just what make him a Christian.
Yeah, it's deeply fascinating when we get to those levels of analysis in this book. And, the scapegoating thing, it seems to me like something that we still see occurring. I think of if there's a crisis in a publicly traded company, the CEO or the executive team will come out and resign, right? They sort of, either the board uses them as a scapegoat, maybe to sort of absolve some of the blame, and then they can install a new management team and move on. Or perhaps there's some self-sacrificial element to it. But I guess the point being that when something goes wrong inside of an organization or society, people want to see someone blamed, right? Someone needs to suffer for it, for the wrongdoing or the mishap or whatever it may be. And that's, but maybe that's just a part of human nature, but it definitely has this really pernicious consequence where, we used to be locked into these blood feuds that the book talks about, where one family murders a member of another member's family or tribe, and then that tribe in turn seeks vengeance on that family, who then seeks vengeance on that family. And these things would just go on and propagate, for generations and generations. And, post Christ, and just to be clear here, we can throw out the theological claims about Christ. We could even perhaps throw out the historical claims of whether he existed or not. Just the fact that it is a story that is part of our civilization. That's enough, right? That's enough to make this, to make it adequate to what we're discussing. I'm not saying that Christ did not exist or Christ was not God. I'm not rendering an opinion on that at all. I'm just saying it's not necessary. You could just say the story is embedded in our culture, and our culture has gone from, these blood feuds, for instance, to now we have something like the rule of law, right? We have systems that have allowed us to transcend those mimetic crises. And then the book, and to your point too, he actually goes into a sacrificial reading of the Gospels and a non-sacrificial reading, which is really just fascinating to look at it from those two perspectives. And to give the audience some idea of how the book is organized, it starts out, there's basically three parts. Part one is this deep anthropological study on the formation of religions and ritual and whatnot. Part two gets more into the religious texts, right? Actually into the Gospels, and the sacrificial, non-sacrificial reading of the story of Christ. And then the last part is really focused on psychology, right? Both I think inter and intra individual psychology. So, I mean, he really spans a wide spectrum of scientific study here, scientific and religious study, to form this unique thesis.
It's like it's a very deep book, like, because mimetic desire is kind of like metaphysic, kind of explain a lot of like even you can explain the anthropology, the myth in the past, what's the pattern behind it, also the psychology of the individual. And he talked about a lot, like, philosopher like Freud or Nietzsche or Dostoevsky, right? He talked about those, he referenced a lot of those great philosopher, and he tried to be given each other like opinions on it. We're not going to dive deep into that because it's kind of like complicated thinking process that Girard revealed in his book. But yeah, it's a broader, it's a very broad idea in the book, and he touched on different aspect in the society, which is very deep, and it's kind of like you can kind of read it many times as you want. Try to get what Girard's thinking process is, and all his thinking process is derived from the idea that we keep talking about, the mimetic desire, how that is, um, how that become like a metaphysics to explain the great philosopher's work.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, so with that introduction, I mean, we're going to go down a lot of rabbit holes, basically, I guess would be the punchline. There's a lot of other things we could preface here, but we'll just leave it at that and jump into chapter 1. And it opens, speaking of great philosophers, with this quote from Aristotle, who wrote that man differs from other animals in his greater aptitude for imitation. So again, this mimetic capability or impulse seems to be something that's very intrinsic to what makes us human,
Yeah.
and is related to a number of things that we'll get into here. But first thing I'll mention here in chapter 1, he talks about in every era, there's basically a discovery that threatens traditionally organized knowledge. So, and I'm reminded here, as we were saying earlier about the Christ story, and this is something Jordan Peterson talks a lot about. This is something that really mystified me the first time I heard it, that human beings live inside of stories. And if you think about a story as like a description of a sequence of events, it's like, well, of course, everything we do is a sequence of events. That doesn't make a lot of sense. But I think what the deeper meaning of story, to me at least, is this role that we fulfill in society, right? We play a role. It's kind of like Shakespeare, the entire world's a stage and every man is an actor upon it, something like that. And it's these enacted roles we play, right? Where whether you're playing the role of father at home, you're playing the role of CEO at the office, you might be playing the role of a book club member. We fill all these different social niches, and in that way, that's how we create human organizations, right? That we engage with one another in these different capacities of authority or competence, whatever it may be. Yet, as he opens in this chapter 1, there's always a discovery that seems to threaten the way we organize those stories or organize knowledge. And he goes on in page 6, he's saying, what is the quote here? I'll read the quote from page 6. He says, "The most we can do is to recognize man as the one who produces symbolic forms, systems of signs, and who then confuses them with reality itself, forgetting that in order to make reality meaningful, he interposes an always particular system of signs between reality and himself." So for me, that's he's really capturing the essence of what it means to live inside of stories, right? That humans are symbol makers, right? We're even right now when we speak to one another, we're exchanging symbols with each other, right? We're both running this open source software called English that allows us to connect our brains together. It's amazing.
Yeah.
But the downside to that is that we run the risk of confusing our symbolic creations with reality itself, right? The map is never the territory, something like that.
Yeah.
So, I'd love to just hear, I guess, your thoughts on that initially. Like, how you interpret humans living in stories and how you see that related to Girard's opening of the book here.
Yeah, I think it's try to establish a foundation behind what's going to happen next, right? He tried to explain the myth, the pattern of myth, which is myth is just a story that may or may not happen, but it tells the truth, right? Like as we discussed about whether or not Jesus is exist in the real world or not. But the reality is, the story has meaning, right? And we all like captured, right, by the narrative and the fascinating plots and the story, in the whether you read myth or whether you read gospel. It doesn't matter like if it's real or not, but it kind of like expose the truth, and how the world works in those texts, right? When you read Shakespeare, right, those story may or may not exist, but it actually, you can kind of like think that it might happen in some corner in the society, or in the family, or in the kingdom. And that thought process, so kind of like touch on the human nature, the human being, how human being function, in many ways. It kind of like the story itself is kind of like imitating in the reality, right? And it might not be the truth. The name might not be the same, but the structure of it, and what happens to it, it might happen in the real world. And what people try to get from those story or myth, or in the gospel, is try to learn what are the lessons behind it. Like the whole historical book is kind of like a lessons. The gospel is kind of full of lessons, and we call it that lessons, like the truth of the world, right? And story just like a way to express it, but it never express it like directly. It doesn't tell you direct, this is how the world works, or this is you should do this, you should do that, you should avoid do this or avoid do that. It's not like that. It's just a way for you to interpret what you think, right? Like when Girard, interestingly, when he read the gospel, he read it differently than what other people are reading. A lot of people read the gospel like it's a sacrificial text, right? But he read it as a non-sacrificial text, and this has been written 2,000 years ago, or even longer, right? People interpret story differently, right? But there's a structure behind it that already exists. It's just like, you know, how you interpret it, and what's your thinking process. And, if you read to the end of the book conclusion, what Girard concluded that his theory, he talks about this like, the revelation is already there in the gospel. I'm just here to give it out, right? Interpret it in my way. And everything exists in the gospel. You just have to read it for yourself, interpret it in your own way. And that's how Girard concluded. He doesn't really think about like, this is my theory, and this is my thought process, and I entitled to it. He doesn't think that way. He thinks the story, the truth is already there for you. You just need to find out.
Yeah, it's brilliantly said. He's essentially taking a new perspective on the Gospels. And he repeatedly says nothing is hidden, right? He'll make a point and then read the Gospel, and it's there, plain as day, just from a new vantage point, which is super interesting.
And I want to touch on like how philosopher, like Jordan Peterson, like he doesn't really invent it any new thing, right? Like Girard, right? He didn't invent it any new thing. He just read the gospel, right? And reveal the truth behind it.
A new interpretation.
Everybody can, and come up with a new idea and way to interpret it. But you can see the same pattern, right? In Jordan Peterson, like Girard, they all have their own interpretation of the gospel, and shockingly, there's a lot of similarity.
Yeah, indeed. Something you said there was really interesting to me too, that we made the point that humans engaged in real-time action are always mirroring, right? We're engaging in mimesis all the time, but there's also a mimesis taking place between the mythological heroes and the individual, right? As the individual is reading or studying these mythologies or even enacting them, there's a mirroring occurring there as well.
Right.
I'm thinking of just one example. They talk about how I've read this book recently, The Inventing the Individual, and how pre-Christ, the notion of the hero was much more like Odysseus, right? He's a seafaring adventurer, big, strong guy, like leading the charge. But then the conception of hero shifted after Christ, where it became much more like loving, compassionate, turn the other cheek, love thy enemy. He actually changed the nature of mythological heroes. And that creates a feedback into the actual society where people, one of the things that really led to the progression of the Christian church were the martyrs, right? They would protest through martyrdom effectively. And they were again mirroring Christ in a way, that they were taking a heroic approach that he took. That was not like Odysseus, leading
Yeah.
a charge into battle, but it was a more of a, almost like a Gandhian type heroism, is much more Christ-like than the conception of the hero pre-Christ. And so
Yeah.
the myth, again, we say we live in stories. I guess you could also call them mythologies. They kind of become carriers or containers for norms, for morals, the moral of the story that we're all kind of living out. And I think, it doesn't, we say like the myth is not real, but I think the myth is not real in the same way like numbers aren't real. They're, Peterson often calls them hyper real, right? Where there's a lot of things that can fit the category of three, right? Anything that has threeness. That doesn't mean three isn't real. It just means it's useful and applicable in one domain, right? And it turns out to be a very important domain, mathematics.
Mm.
And the myth is sort of the same, as like we observe a lot of human action across long periods of time, and we abstract out the commonalities or the principles, and we distill that into less, a few stories, and then maybe we distill that again into one until you get to something like Christ, which is an archetypal hero myth, right? It's like the
Yeah.
ultimate betrayal and attack and all that met with compassion and love and everything that Christ represents. So, we have to be careful with that word real. I think it's very dangerous for people like, oh, it's just, we even say it's common in the West, like, oh, that's a myth, which means it's not, like, it's untrue. But I would
Yeah.
argue there's, we have to be careful with that terminology because, well, okay, is math real? I mean, you could say no, three is not anything floating around, but math gives us this extremely powerful grasp of the universe. And I think myth offers us something similar.
Yeah, I mean, even the Christian church, right? There are a group of people read it like literally believe, the ark, Noah's ark exists somewhere,
Yep.
right? Literally, and there are people really like this is like just like a story, right? There's something behind it. We don't have to believe in every word they say, but there's a certain meaning behind each story, and I think we should be focused on the meaning rather than the literal text.
Yeah, it's a great point that literal interpretation is not the only true interpretation, perhaps. That, there can be a moral of a story that's very useful and relevant and real in the sense that it influences human action. Doesn't mean that that it's historically true, and it doesn't really matter in a lot of cases.
Doesn't really matter. I
Yeah.
mean, this is just like it could be it might happens, right? It's just like the story of I go back to like heroism, story of maybe um octopus is it real or not? It doesn't matter, but the matter is just storytelling, the truth that will reveal behind it, and how it's a tragedy story, like the story of the Shakespeare, right? This is it real? Like King Lear is real, not? It doesn't matter, but what matters is just like the meaning behind the story, or what the story of King Lear trying to tell you. I think that's more interesting to explore rather than figure out if King Lear really exists or not.
Yeah, agreed. And just one more maybe example to drive home the point, you know, government isn't real. Businesses aren't real. Like all these social constructs we create, they're not any concrete reality. They're this shared conceptual or imaginal space, right? Right? You're the CEO of a company, right? You have people that work underneath you, right? They're not physically underneath you. They're just in this hierarchy that you all have agreed to participate in. They act as if you are above them in the sense of authority or whatever it may be. And there's a useful, that's a necessary, useful, functional structure, but it's not real in the sense that it is actually observable or concrete. It's a story, right? It's a story. Mimesis Capital is a story, and all these things, all these human organizations that we're involved in, nation state, city, company, you go on and on, sports teams, these are all stories that we're basically living inside of. And they are as real. They are real to the extent that we act as if they exist, basically. So as long as we act as if, the government has power, then, well, government's going to have power. As long as we act as if maybe this money is useful, then it's going to be useful. Now, there's some real, it's not like, it's such a hard thing to talk about because it's not purely a belief system. It's not like you just believe whatever you want. Like, let's all believe bananas are money. That's not going to work because bananas don't have, there's objective qualities that we desire in money that bananas lack, for instance. So there's this weird sort of feedback between our subjective stories that we're creating and then objective reality. And we live somewhere in between.
Yeah. And if you think about this large organization, right, and why they are so dominated and so lasting. I think there's like mimetic desire playing that role because the symbolic, of the CEO or the symbolic of presidency, right, is so grabbing, and people wanted that so bad, and that keep the structure and organization lasting, right? But is that a good mimetic desire? Is that a good mimesis, or that just like a way you just wanted to compete, you just want that title, and you work so hard in the hierarchy to reach that, the top. And after you reach to the top, you have all the power and what's left, right? And if you look at Christ's story, it's just like when he realized he's the son of God, like he literally, right, is on the top of the hierarchy, right? Whether or not he's a human being or not, he's the son of God, right? That's, as a human, you are on the top, very top, right? But he realized, you shouldn't just act like, a totalitarian leader, right? You should act with love, and that's what his interpretation of being a son of God, being a king, in his kingdom, right? A beloved human being, a beloved the king of his kingdom of God, right? So if you're looking at more you know more into the real organization today, government agency or whatever, are they performing a good mimesis? But it keeps the society function, right? And because there's a mimetic desire with that power and role, and that creates kind of like competitiveness, and that also it kind of like destroying a lot of humans interpretation of what is the real life is the real life uh, um, a way to fight for a role in a company, or the life is about taking care of your neighbor, right, taking care of your family, right? And people sacrifice a lot to fight for the hierarchy, and is that a good desire, right? But it kind of like forces you into that. Like if you work for a big corporation or you work for a government agency, there's a certain systematic, that's working on you, that tell you this is a way of life, and you should desire this role, and you keep climbing to the top, right? And that's how organization kind of like structured. And it's very interesting, right? And there's a mimetic in that thinking, right? Why do I want to become a CEO of a company? That because that represent power, right? And that represent something you want. Because if you don't want it, somebody else will, right? And they all fight for that role. That's like kind of like last for a small company, but for large corporation, even governments, that mimetic desires even bigger. And would that create conflict, or that create a very natural way of capitalism type of um, free market dynamic, right?
Yeah, it's an excellent point that these stories are real enough for us to, people orient their entire lives around them, right? You identify with your position in these hierarchies to the point where if you lose your position, right, you lose your job or whatever, it can be total defamation or shameful experience. And I guess the Christ story, it's kind of like the ultimate story because it's saying like all of that is subordinate to love, right? Love thy neighbor, love one another. The things that we are basically fundamentally, right? That's how we're designed, right? I'm thinking of Marcus Aurelius. He said human beings are like the left and right hand, the rows of upper and lower teeth. Like we're designed to cooperate and interact.
Yeah.
But this mimetic, acquisitive mimesis, let's say, can sometimes lead us astray. And I want to unpack some of these terms for the audience.
Sure.
One thing I want to hit on first, though, just to reiterate the importance of mimesis or imitation, is one little excerpt here on page 7. Girard writes, "And yet there is nothing or next to nothing in human behavior that is not learned, and all learning is based on imitation. If human beings suddenly ceased imitating, all forms of culture would vanish." So again, just the importance of basically all learning and cultural transmission is achieved through this mimetic process. Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, CrowdHealth. CrowdHealth is a Bitcoin-enabled alternative to legacy health insurance. Now let's face it, legacy health insurance is an absolute scam. Nobody can explain this better than the legendary comedian Chris Rock.
Insurance. You got to have some insurance. You got to. That's an insurance. They shouldn't even call it insurance. They should just call it in case shit. Like, I give a company some money in case shit happens. Now, if shit don't happen, shouldn't I get my money back?
So with CrowdHealth, instead of just paying premiums that you'll never see again, you can hold part of this pool of savings in dollars and in Bitcoin through CrowdHealth. And when you have a health event, you can draw against this pool of communal savings. So go to joincrowdhealth.com/breedlove to learn more or sign up. Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, Wasabi Wallet. Wasabi lets you use Bitcoin privately while still maintaining full control over your money. Specifically, Wasabi Wallet is an open source, non-custodial wallet with privacy built in by default. By using Wasabi, you're effectively putting the private back in private property. Wasabi Wallet is an easy-to-use privacy wallet that can support any amount of Bitcoin transactions. So go to wasabiwallet.io today to download this state-of-the-art wallet software. Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, Swan Private. Swan Private is a concierge financial services firm based in Los Angeles. Now, I've known the Swan team for years, and these guys are laser focused on the Bitcoin mission. They even have a zero tolerance policy for all shitcoining. Recently, their CEO, Corey Clipston, was instrumental in calling out many of these crypto scams right before they collapsed, saving a lot of people a lot of money in the process. Swan Private focuses on guiding high net worth individuals and businesses on all aspects of Bitcoin strategy, including buying, custodying, and market research. This concierge service provides you direct access to a private advisor by text, phone, or email. So go to swanprivate.com/breedlove today to sign up. Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, Bitcoin Conference 2023. This is going to be a 3-day event held May 18th through 20th, 2023 in Miami, Florida. This is going to be the biggest Bitcoin event of the year, and the past 2 years in Miami have been simply amazing. Speakers already announced for 2023 include Michael Saylor, Alex Gladstein, Corey Clipston, and many others. Last year, we did a 10 million sats giveaway specifically for this event, and we're going to do it again this year. So, to get discounted tickets and enter for a chance to win 10 million sats, go to b.tc/conference/2023 and use discount code BREEDLOVE. Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, Masterworks. Masterworks gives you access to the fine art market at more affordable price points. They do this by offering you fractional shares in their $500 million portfolio of fine art. Now, fine art is an alternative asset class, and historically, it's been a great performer and a really good hedge against inflation. Most investors typically hold anywhere from 2 to 10% of their assets in an asset like fine art. To sign up or learn more, go to masterworks.com and use promo code BREEDLOVE. Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, Casa. Casa makes it simple to buy and secure your Bitcoin without wondering whether you're doing it right. Specifically, Casa provides a multi-key custody solution, which is by far the most secure way to custody your Bitcoin. Now, when I talk about Bitcoin being theft-proof money or inviolable private property, a multi-key custody model is exactly what I am talking about. Using multiple keys lets you maintain full control of your Bitcoin while also giving you redundancy in case you lose one of the keys. It's also the best way to secure your Bitcoin for inheritance planning purposes. So go to keys.casa, that's C-A-S-A, today to sign up and use discount code BREEDLOVE. I want to unpack this acquisitive mimesis because this is one of those terms, and we use a few different terms to describe this, but I think he's got a great little excerpt here that explains it. This is from page 8. Girard writes, "There is no reason to exclude appropriation from imitation. Plato nonetheless does just this, and the omission passes unnoticed because all of his successors, beginning with Aristotle, have followed his lead." And he goes on to write to describe this. "If one ape observes another reach for an object, it is immediately tempted to imitate the gesture. It also happens that the animal visibly resists the temptation. And if the imitative gesture amuses us by reminding us of human beings, the failure to complete it, that is to say, the repression of what already can be nearly defined as a desire, amuses us even more. It makes the animal a sort of brother to us by showing it subject to the same fundamental rule as humanity, that of preventing conflict, which the convergence of two or several avid hands toward one and the same object cannot help but provoke." So, this to me gets just straight into the heart of economics, that there's limitless wants in the world and there's limited means to satisfy those wants. And so when we're all engaged in this mirroring process, we're almost inevitably going to reach for the same thing at some point. And therein lies conflict.
So I think I want to unpack that a little bit in a very straightforward way, like what Girard mean, desire in the mimetic way. Like what object should be desired, right? I think we need to define that. If an object is infinite, you lack desire because it's infinite. You're kind of like, you don't want to desire something that is, abundant, right? You desire something that's scarce, right? So when people like desire for an object, it desire for scarcity of that object. It doesn't really, if an object is kind of infinite, we won't even desire it. We won't even think about. We won't even have that kind of desire. So desire over an object is desire over a scarcity, right? If you desire something that is scarce, that's oftentimes happens in the free market, right? Free market would decide which one is most scarce, and how you gonna know things that are scarce is because it's hard to get, also it's expensive to get, right? Um, so what Girard really means about desire over something is desire over scarce object, and that desire over scarce object create conflict over that object. For example, right, gold is relatively scarce, and if there's only like maybe there's 100 ounces of gold in the safe, and the two guys wanted it bad because you can sell it at an expensive price and it's scarce. And it's why like civilization, countries, rich people, poor people fight over it, and think about it like this is because gold is scarce, so we all wanted it, and when we all wanted it, it become exchangeable money, right? And that's when when you think about money is scarce, that's why you desire. And if you think about like non-scarce money, right, you won't desire it, but you still think it is usable, but you won't desire. You wanted to get rid of it whenever you have a chance for a scarce good, right? You exchange for a scarce good because your desire is not in the goods that produce a lot. Your desire is in the goods that produce less and less, and that creates an interesting dynamic. And and over time, abstractly, right, not talking about physical goods here, abstractly, you think about power is scarce, right? The presidency is scarce, a chairman of a company, a CEO of a company is scarce. So that create a bigger desire for individuals or for groups to fight over, right? And that creates a larger conflict in the organization or in society as a whole. It's oftentimes fight over scarce desire, not like infinite, abundant type of desire.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and I think maps onto economics wonderfully. People, for instance, don't fight over oxygen very often. Oxygen is extremely vital to life, right? Every breath, we're constantly demanding it, but it is so super abundant, it's non-scarce, that there's no acquisitive mimesis about oxygen, right? There's just too much of it. But we do fight over something like gold, right? Gold has no value to our existence in terms of our vitality. We don't need to eat it or breathe it. Yet we've fought over gold probably more than any other, like that and land, probably the two things we fought over more than anything else in human history. And it's exactly to your point, because it's scarce, right? And
this is something like Girard talks about a lot, like the conflict of the world, like how the world reached to a point of extreme conflict. Is that it is because when you have a scarce object that both parties desire and they fight over it, right? And it's what scarcity create that kind of desire. And for example, like the history is plenty of evidence where country fight over lands, country fight over gold, and gold and land represent what? It represent the ultimate power, right? And if you are a leader, if you are the general of the country, what you really want, desire is what other people have or what other people possess, and you want that, right? And in that process of competition, you might compete with the other country to try to get that land, and it happens over time in the human history, right? Like for example, I'm in Taiwan, right? So this is a very interesting. We'll go back into the modern world now. Like Taiwan has been desired, by China, as well as the U.S., right? And we are in this conflict between the two largest nations of the world. What that will lead to, I don't know, but it certainly leads to certain, conflict. If it's getting extreme, we might fight over it, right? The two nations might fight over it just because the scarce resource Taiwan has, which is, semiconductor, right? And that's why you see a lot of tension in the news all over the place, and and that kind of started escalating as both nation desire increase, right? As both fight over it for this very very small island, and that kind of happens in the history again and again. And I'm a bit worried, but let's see if we can solve it in the more peaceful way. But if you study Girard, or you are like Girardian, um, history often leads to the bad outcome, not the good one. So you just have to be prepared. I'm speaking about more pessimistic, because if you read a lot of Girard, you start to think about, you try to be optimistic, but the way he interpret the conflict, when the Mimetic desire escalated to the extreme, it has to be, it will result in a total war. And that's why he can kind of he warned about the nuclear war. He warned about the end of the human society and human civilization, because we haven't find a way to solve the problem beside we go back to the scapegoating mechanism. And this time we have the power to destroy the whole world, right? In the past, before the nuclear, we don't have that power, but now human beings possess that power. And it's kind of like we are in a good equilibrium right now. But if something turn, we have the ability to destroy ourselves. And that could happen when a two nation fight over a scarce object. And it's always like that. And and that fight will be devastating, and will be first time, right? First time ever in human history, we're talking about the end of the world, because we possess greater power than ever before.
Yes, very important point, that this dynamic of acquisitive mimesis is not only occurring at the individual scale, right? It occurs between companies, between nation states in the case of something like Taiwan.
Yeah.
And we have reached a point in our technological development that we now are so powerful we can destroy the game, right? It's never been possible pre-nuclear, but now it's like the stakes are so high that we could actually end it, right? End it for everyone forever, so that's it's a lot to kind of absorb, but it really is premised on scarcity ultimately, right? Just again, that people want things and there's a limited amount of things, so conflict naturally ensues when multiple people go for the one thing, or the limited amount of things.
Yeah, and if you think about what happened in the world today, you saw. I want to refer back to one of my right now, like one of my favorite research economists, Zoltan Bozar, right? He wrote about competition over commodity, and commodity is scarce, right? And scarce commodity is what driven the world that we used to know, which is the globalization, right? And country work in equilibrium. They work seamlessly together. Now, like, we have a deglobalization world that we are entering into, which is full of mimetic conflict, because we are trying to fight over scarce good, like oil, natural gas. All these are scarce good, and what that will lead to is just you see the Ukraine conflict, right? You see the war happening there. And would that lead to the bigger consequences? could be, and that just formed in the notion that Girard described, right? When you need scarce goods and you desire of it, and you just have to fight over it.
Yeah, scarcity, right? We're trying to overcome scarcity in both ways, right? Whether we are, I think there was Oppenheimer talked about the economic versus the political means, right? The economic means of overcoming scarcity is trade and innovation, wealth accumulation. And then the political means is war, right? Take it, seize it, confiscate it, whatever it may be. And just to try and unpack that a bit, scarcity, we visit this topic a lot on the show, and it's not, people often think it's purely a supply side phenomenon, but it's not. It's really anywhere that there's more net desire or demand than there is supply or means to satisfy that desire. So it very much is acquisitive mimesis, like almost in a nutshell, right? It's like more people want the thing than there are of the thing, than there is an amount of the thing. So that is scarcity. And I wonder, just on the topic of gold, this is something I wanted to just spitball with you. In terms of how gold monetized, the common narrative is, it was originally a collectible. People would, find this in riverbeds and adorn themselves with it. And then eventually it became a store of value, and then later a medium of exchange, and finally a unit of account. That was kind of like the path of the long arc of gold's history to becoming money. But I wonder how much, I feel like acquisitive mimesis has to be a part of gold's monetization in a way, right? Like people whoever starts to wear it, they adorn themselves with it. That triggers this mimetic desire, right? Other people imitating, right? Oh, this guy's wearing some gold on his tunic or whatever. I would like to wear some gold on my tunic. And then due to that, just the natural properties of gold, that it's very hard to produce. Like we're very slow to increase the supply of gold, for instance. So in that process that we are economizing over time, right? Maybe we're increasing output of everything else, food, buildings, tools. So the purchasing power of that gold would be growing over time. So originally it's a collectible, but because we're increasing the output of, food, capital, et cetera, that the purchasing power per unit, we're increasing that capital faster than we're increasing the gold supply. The purchasing power of each unit of gold would be increasing. So that would accelerate this mimetic desire, I would imagine, right? People see other people have gold. Gold is making them more rich over time. They're basically, ancient hodlers, I guess you might say. And then that further amplifies this desire for gold. And it literally, elevates it to the global monetary standard by the 1800s, I think. And, depending where you draw the line, but basically gold had become dominant by then.
I think there's, every single money that we have been used in the human history is derived from, that desire, right? For example, seashell, right? Seashell is scarce on the mountain, but not in the sea. And that's why people use it as a currency, as a money in the mountain, not at the sea, because at the sea is abundant, at the mountain is scarce. And that over time kind of like get abandoned. Why? Because technology improved, people can ship seashell to the mountain much faster, and money increase. So that's a collapse in terms of supply, and there's less desire over seashell. And now we're going into gold and silver, right? Gold and silver hard to produce, is scarce. And why it becomes a currency and the money is because there's a couple unique characteristic about it, right? It is scarce first, and hard to produce, right? And you can melt it in any shape you want, and it's shiny, right? It's artistic. Also, it is a form of stored value, it's a form of medium exchange. all that good characteristic of money, right? And that becomes desirable over time. It doesn't happen one day, right? When you offer someone the gold as the money, they tell you, give me seashell. But over time, people desire, and that desire increase. It becomes a kind of like a global money. Not only just Europe, Western civilization accepted, right? The gold, the whole world accepted as the money, right? You look at Asian China, or Asian, Egyptian, whatever, that they accept gold as the de facto money. And that doesn't happen overnight. It happened in kind of like reinforce mimetic desire. Like people desire it, and it's hard to produce, and people desire more. And ultimately, I think the best money is often the one that people most desire. It's a goods and services. It's a goods that most people desire, and that becomes a de facto money. I think gold monetization path is kind of like that, right? First, people don't understand it, and then it becomes the de facto global money because everyone desired it. So I think I switched to fiat, right? Fiat become a dominant form of money because why it solved one of the major problems with gold is this is portability, right? Paper money is much more portable. Fiat, digital fiat is much more portable, but it doesn't solve the problem of scarcity. It's abundant money, and that's why you see the But in past, it's not like that, right? In past, it's like fiat money can exchange for gold, but that's not the case anymore, right? It abandoned because the human kind of like civilization abandoned that concept. Right? We no longer convert our fiat into gold, and we now carry just fiat, right? And that fiat is a representation of credit. And we kind of run that experience for a while because we trust in the centralized authority, the central banks, right? And we believe they're not going to increase the supply, and they're going to maintain the monetary policy as stable as it can be. But that's not the case, right? In 2008, we saw that. In 2020, we saw that, there's a breach in trust. And the desire over the fiat money decreased a lot over time, right? Because why? It's very simple, because it's abundant. Central bank can print as much money as they could, and so why you want to desire over that fiat money, right? There's no reason. And then Bitcoin come along, right? And Bitcoin introduced this idea of fixed supply, and there's nothing else like it, right? It's solving the problem of the gold, right? Is basically a better version of gold, and which, over time, I think, as a desire kind of like reinforce itself, people desire the scarce good over time, and ultimately they become the most desirable goods in the world, and then they become the money in the world. And I think all the good money, right, all the bedrock of economy and civilization is always based on this concept of this idea of the best scarce goods, and that become the money of the society and economy, and that's how you're gonna build a different civilization, right? And that money cannot be seized, cannot be corrupt, right? And it's not gonna be centralized. So I think there's all aspect, right, of what is a good, good money, and ultimately the good money is most scarce money.
Yeah, it's a lot of great points there, and that the game, I don't know, this acquisitive mimetic pattern or phenomena, it's not something you can like opt in or opt out of even. I'm thinking of China, India, they stayed on a silver standard the longest, but they basically lost purchasing power as a result of the rest of the world moving to a gold standard. So they're sort of trying to not play that game. They're trying to, have their own standard, but they had a less scarce money ultimately, and that cost them, right? It cost them actual power in the world, purchasing power, and then ultimately political power. And so,
Yeah, and you touched on a good point. Like you're losing power, right? You're losing political power, economic power. Why are you losing the power? Because you're not holding the most desirable goods.
yes,
That's why you're losing power.
yes,
And then there's consequence of losing power over scarce good, right? And this is very like deep down into like psychology or human nature. Like you as an individual, right, or as a country or as a company, whatever, right, as an organization, you need to possess the most scarce good so that you won't be losing power over competitors, or you're not losing power over time. And that power can be like purchasing power, right, political power, economy power. And if you lose all that, by not holding the most desirable goods, there's a consequence, and the consequence is there.
yeah. I'm reminded of the Ayn Rand quote that you're free to ignore reality, but you are not free to ignore the consequences of ignoring reality.
Yeah,
It's basically the hardest money to produce is going to become the focus of mimetic desire, right?
exactly. And this is like a revelation for me when I read Girard. It's like when I think about money and history of money and how mimetic desire plug into it, you see the pattern, right? Always like you need to be first, like that's let's talk about like characteristic of money, right? You have to make sure this goods satisfy all the needs of being a money, right? I think until Bitcoin discovered, there is no such a money like that, right? Gold is most close to it,
Right.
but Bitcoin, as technology improved, it kind of like improve on the gold's characteristic, even 100x better or 1000x better, and the roadmap of Bitcoin becoming a money of the world, it has to be scarce and desirable, and that's how monetization happened. It's how all the money becomes a money, because before they become money, it's just commodity, collectible, and when they become money, you need all of characteristic, right? Portability, scarcity. In Bitcoin, you have programmability, you have unseizability, right? All this characteristic become the de facto good money, or a good hard money. So over time, as because mimetic desire always reinforce each other. As you and me try to desire Bitcoin, right? That's just you and me, right? But the desire create at that moment when we both desire Bitcoin. And now, if you look at the adoption rate, right? There are millions of people, corporation, governments desire over Bitcoin, and that kind of reinforces itself, kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. It's too large, too big. Is the momentum is too huge. It's just hard to stop the monetization process. And that ultimately, why is that, right? Why is that? Why the momentum is so strong that you cannot even break it or even stop it? That even the government cannot stop it. It's because the desire over scarce goods is too huge. It's embedded in the human nature. It's embedded in the creation of the human history. It's just in you, right? It's in every single people's psychology. Like people want what other want, right? And that just the idea how you want Bitcoin, right? And maybe then your neighbor wants it, right? And they started to desire over it, and over time, as more people desire over it, it becomes the money of the world. And we're kind of like on that path already. It's just like how long we should take to get there. right? I think gold took like maybe a couple hundred years to get the global money status. How fast will Bitcoin go? Right. I think, I don't know, but it will be pretty fascinating. It will be pretty fast, I think, because it's digital, global, accessible. But ultimately, I want to go back to the idea of mimetic desire, and that's why this phenomenon has happened like this, and it happened before, right? It just followed the same pattern. It has the same monetization process. So I think Girard also touched on this a lot, right? There's a pattern in the myth, there's a pattern in the Jesus story, and I think that always linked back to his idea of mimetic desire. And same thing with the money that we are using. If you're looking at the history of the money, right, there's also a pattern, and you find mimetic desire everywhere in the process of monetization.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Just thinking about from a nation state standpoint alone, that Bitcoin lets you monetize these otherwise useless energy sources, right? You can monetize, natural gas that you might flare, for instance. You can now monetize that with Bitcoin. So even if a state doesn't even need to care about Bitcoin at all, but just the fact that they're obviously going to want to monetize something that would otherwise be waste, that induces mimetic desire, right? One country does it, another country sees that country doing it, they want to do it.
Yep.
That the net increase to the hash rate, the Bitcoin mining hash rate, is increasing the security and therefore the value of the network. It's making the money harder to produce, and it's inducing other groups to join the race. So it's like there is this real unstoppable mimetic process occurring. That's just one example at one level. That's obviously a big one, but it's also among Bitcoiners, right? We all say we have the same amount, not enough, right? So we're actively engaged in mimetic, acquisitive mimesis with one another when it comes to Bitcoin. And I think I don't see how you stop that phenomenon from proliferating at every level. It's like, so long as people want wealth and power, Bitcoin will monetize just by virtue of what it is.
Yeah. I think this is a truth behind every dominant money, right? This is like a things hidden since the foundation of the world. The things hidden since the foundation of the money, right? How the process goes. Yeah, it's reinforcing the mimetic desire. And the most scarce good has the strongest mimetic desire reinforcing, right? If it's not scarce, there's no mimetic desire reinforcing each other, because Bitcoin is the fixed supply and is uncorruptible. That makes it even more desirable than any money in the world that has come before it, right? And that's like a central thesis of me, investing in the Bitcoin and naming my company Mimesis. Is just the realizing the pattern of monetization of global money. I think Bitcoin's on the path to that, and I think it could take a decade, it could take generations, but I think there's nothing else. There's nothing else you wanted to desire more than Bitcoin, because everything you knew in life is not capped. Only Bitcoin is capped. I mean capped. I mean goods and services, that's capped, right? And I think that's powerful. And I think as mimetic desire reinforcing, and the momentum is going to take us to the kind of like a promised land, and there's nothing you can stop it, because it's just so embedded in the human nature. Things just happen like that, right? Even you have something that come below, quote unquote better Bitcoin, like the crypto bros are talking about, they are not actually facing the real issue, right? And they have they don't have time. Time is not on their side, right? They cannot reinforce mimetic design in a short period of time. This is not happen just by introducing marketing, introducing a new technology. It doesn't happen like that. It happens. This is like a phenomenon. You don't know how it happened, but it happened. Like Bitcoin in this history, we don't know. I don't even know like how this phenomenon happened in the first place. But it's kind of like it happens, and it has this mimetic desire already reinforcing each other, and that's the only asset or the only money that I think has a chance to get there. Other is just like chasing behind Bitcoin. They have less desirable characteristic, right? And this is why I've been a Bitcoin only guy in a way investing in cryptocurrency, because when I view it from the mimetic desire standpoint, no other cryptocurrency other than Bitcoin match the criteria, and I think like Christianity, right? You need a pure foundation. You need a foundation that is built on truth, and that's like another deep fault on Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is built on this truth foundation. It's built because Satoshi Nakamoto is wanted to change the money system, right, from the outside. He wanted to create a money that's not controlled by the government, right, and it's fixed amount, right, and it has all the good characteristic of a good money. And the foundation is so pure. It's just like founding of a new civilization, and you need truth that's hidden in the protocol, which we can all analyze it, and we can all see it because it's open source. There's no hidden message. It's all you can like just interpret it based on the code, based on what happened on the Bitcoin blockchain, right? And to me, that's just like you open up like a pure open source naked script, right? You can analyze it yourself. You can see it for yourself. You don't need any other people to tell you this is a right Bitcoin, right? Because you can see it for yourself. So this is a very interesting segue into like Bitcoin as a network and Bitcoin as a money. I think it both reinforce itself as a true foundation of a civilization, as a good money. And I think the network, the foundation of the network is also very pure. And it's not like, let's go back to the story of Ken Abel, right? Ken Abel's story is kind of like the altcoin foundation is found on the bad mimetic, right? Is found on the, I would not say too extreme, but it's found on the bad behavior. It's found out this notion of pop and dom, right? It's not found out idea that there's a fair distribution, or an idea that nobody can corrupt it, right? Satoshi cannot create that, but nobody else after it create a similar goods, right? And I think that makes me extra favor Bitcoin, because you can see how the network is formed from day one, and there's no interruption from the Satoshi himself, right, after he disappeared. Because of that good foundation, lays out a good mimetic desire. Not like we all try to imitate in a way like what Satoshi is try to accomplish, right? We all imitate him in a good way.
Yeah, build something meaningful and then get out of the way, right?
Yeah. And we kind of like it's a good mimetic in a way, right? If you try to imitate a technocrat in like those altcoin founder, that's to me, I think that's not a way to go. And I think it's just a bad mimetic. You don't imitate people that want to grab power and status. They have so much ego, right? You don't imitate Dong Quan, right? you wanna imitate Satoshi. So that's a good kind of like mimetic um, forming by you know understanding Bitcoin, and that can reflect in your life in a major way, right? Just like you try to imitate Jesus Christ and be like him is a good way to have a good life, right?
Yes.
And to imitate Cain, you are imitate the life of murder, right? So I think this is deep, it's very deep in terms of like how we, in terms of like money and also the network itself.
Yeah, one of my favorite aspects about Bitcoin is that it's like the title of his book, nothing is hidden within Bitcoin, right? That's one of its primary values, is that there is nothing hidden. There's no way
Yeah.
to obfuscate or deceive or lie or conceal. It's just open source. What you see is what you get. And it's created as kind of like a perfect history or a way, like what's on the Bitcoin blockchain has just happened. It's not really arguable, not really open to reinterpretation. It's kind of like a story that can't be rewritten by the winners, which I think is really important. We see history often get kind of reinterpreted as new polities or countries come into power. But with the Bitcoin blockchain, it's not open to that reinterpretation. It's just this very clean, perfected economic history. And, I think there's something here too, because that there is also this fiat mimetic crisis where everyone's fighting to control the money in the world, right? And that if you just look at the history of World War, the conclusion of World War II, what's the first thing the United States does after it declares itself victorious? It rewrites the global banking rules in its own favor. So there's this ongoing geopolitical struggle to control the monetary system or the economic order. And Bitcoin seems like sort of like Christ helps redeem us from these cycles of mimetic vengeance and violence.
Yeah.
It seems like maybe Bitcoin can help us do that at the geopolitical scale, at least the great promise of Bitcoin. Obviously, we're early days, but it's just fascinating to me, all these parallels. It's a little bit too much to be just coincidental. So
Yeah, I think both are similar in a way that they reveal the truth, right? They reveal the hidden truth. Like what Jesus revealed is the scapegoat mechanism that happened in the past. He wants to break it. That's Girard's interpretation, right? He wants to break the cycle. He wants to fight against Satan, right? Fight against the evil. And his story is just about breaking that mimetic cycle, bad mimetic cycle. And what Satoshi and Bitcoin come along, he written that in the Genesis block, right? Chancellor on the brink, second ballot for bank. That message is so clear. He revealed what? Your money is not scarce. Central bank has your money, and they control you. You should break that control. We should break that cycle. And I call it, the cycle of fiat, right? And the cycle of fiat or cycle of centralized money has been around for many, many, many centuries. Whenever in the human history before Bitcoin ever break from an authority control money, right? Even the gold standard, right? Authority control gold, right? And they can have all the resources to seize your gold, to make a change of your use of gold, right? And that could that could change with Bitcoin, and Bitcoin has a technological advantage to avoid being seized, to avoid being truly regulated at a protocol level by anyone, right? And what Bitcoin reveal is what have been haunted us hunted the humanity for thousands of years, right, is the control of the money, right? And what Jesus kind of in parallel did is he wants to separate, the state and the religion in a way and break through that, scapegoating mechanism. You don't need a scapegoat to resolve the conflict. It's just, peace and love, right? How come the humanity is so dumb to realize that? But he's like the first one to reveal that in an eye-opening way. And I think Bitcoin is the same thing. It revealed that it's truly evil in its nature, which is how come authority and central bank can control the money, and that money means power. And if you try to create undesirable money and force everybody to desire it, that's just a disaster for the economy. And if you look at the history, it's always like that, right? The Roman, they dilute the gold coin, silver coin. Even in Asian China, they dilute the silver coin, they dilute the gold coin, try to stay relevant, and that all creates undesirable money and that corrupt the entire economy. I think Bitcoin tried to like reveal that truth, and even more so is creating a tool, enable individual, enable organization to escape, right? It's kind of lifeboat. And if you haven't realized that, right, you should be studying Mimetic Desire, studying Girard, and think about how this will end up. Like the fiat has a fiat crisis, and I think it's a bad Mimetic, right? How come you want to, desire over abundance of money, right, or non-scarce money, and that just create a bad feedback loop for your individual psychology, for your life, for your family, right? It's so deep. You don't even kind of realize like how this abundance of money creates a problem for society.
It's a great framing, actually, that every dollar printed makes dollars less desirable, while at the same time it makes Bitcoin more desirable.
Yep.
And so that's it, right? We're so addicted to printing money. It's never going to stop, as all of human history proves. And all of the desire will ultimately flow to the thing that can't be printed or counterfeited.
Yep.
Okay, I think this is an awesome introduction. We kind of took a Bitcoin tangent at the end there. But hopefully we've done a good job laying out some of the key themes in this book. And I think we will continue this conversation because there is a lot more in store. Louis, could you let my audience know where they could find out more about you or your work?
You can go follow me on Twitter, Louis H. Liu, and also follow the company, Mimesis Capital, .com. We have done some great research, and we did awesome video with MicroStrategy and Swan on Bitcoin generational wealth. I think I already lay out my thesis here in the podcast related to Mimetic Desire and Bitcoin. If you want to reach out, feel free to reach me out on Twitter.
Awesome. We'll link to that in the show notes. Louis, thank you so much. See you back here again soon.
All right, thank you, Robert. Appreciate it.